Now, as we do every Friday, let's hear from Fraser Nelson about what he's got going on his column, which is on thetimes.com very shortly, if not now. Good afternoon, Fraser.
Hi, Kathy.
So you've been talking about avoiding a trade war, don't fight back. Tell us, unspool that for us.
Well, we've had phase one of the trade war, which is Donald Trump saying the tariffs he's going to impose on various countries around the world. Now, that's bad, but what can make it twice as bad is if people retaliate in kind. Like Canada is slapping a 25% tariff on American cars, the EU is proposing countermeasures. These will simply make something bad a lot worse. But what's interesting is that when Downing Street did soundings of British businessmen, every single one came back saying, don't retaliate. If you don't believe in tariffs, don't impose your own. And this is the way of making sure we can come through this unscathed. Now, I also argue that this gives Keir Starmer an opportunity to position himself in the same way that he's assembled a kind of coalition of the willing for Ukraine. Maybe he can do the same for those who don't like tariffs and like free trade, because you've got Britain now in charge of his own trade policy, able to make common cause. With, for example, Jim O'Neill has said maybe the G7, apart from America, should get together and decide to cut their tariffs on services to trade a bit more. So right now there is a chance of bringing something good out of the Trumpian mayhem.
Lots to unpick there. Just first, when you were talking about, you shouldn't retaliate, businesses don't want that. Businesswoman Deborah Meaden was speaking to us just a few moments ago, and she was saying the risk is with that you risk looking weak. So at some point, I guess that's why Keir Starmer's drawn up this list of potential US goods that could be targeted. There does have to be a threat implicit, if not explicit, doesn't there?
Well, I'm not sure who's demanding that he imposes this threat. I mean, if America's shooting itself in the foot, it doesn't make sense for us to grab a gun and shoot ourselves in the foot as well, no matter how many people are calling for it. But the funny thing is that if you look at the opinion polls in Sweden, where I am right now, in France, in Italy, they are all in favor of tariffs. The EU population seems to be backing the retaliatory tariffs. We don't see any similar clamour in Britain. Maybe because we're just different as a country. We're by and large more interested in shopping than in politics. We don't want our shopping to be made more expensive. And we've got far more of a free trading history. So this idea of being seen to be weak, this is sort of the weird kind of fake narrative. It's just as fake as saying, but the tariffs are imposed in other countries. They're not. They're always imposed on your own people. We're in a cost of living crisis still, so why make it worse?
Well, a very good point. And just to go back to something you were saying just a minute ago about the economic coalition of the willing, that was actually something the Lib Dems were calling for. They were saying get close to the EU, which is again a point echoed by Deborah Meaden when I chatted to her a few minutes ago. The idea that, really at some point the UK has to choose between the EU and the US, and right now it's looking like the EU is a more reliable partner. What do you make of that?
Well, that's obvious nonsense. I don't think anybody is saying, I wish that the UK didn't have its own trade policy. Right now, we can be independent of both the EU and the US. We can trade a path between them. The one where the Lib Dems are right in saying we should get a lot closer to the EU. We should say to them, look, guys, we are your closest ally. Let's ditch all of this kind of shrapnel from the Brexit wars. Let's ditch the tension, the friction, the regulations that shouldn't really be there, the paperwork, and let's trade more together. But I'm not quite sure how many people are thinking, what would be great if we had Ursula von der Leyen making our trade policy rather than Keir Starmer.
I'm not sure. No, I wasn't trying to imply that. I don't think Deborah Meaden was either, but just really, I think maybe making the same point as you, that the EU, the UK, Canada, present a united front as a sort of bigger bloc to stand up to Donald Trump.
Well, the bloc we need to create is of free trading countries worldwide. Let's see what Japan is saying. Let's see what Canada is saying. Let's see what New Zealand is saying. I mean, we should have the EU, I'm afraid to say, has got a little bit of a problem when it comes to free trade deals. It's not very good at, it doesn't particularly believe them. It is quite tariffy as an entity. I think it makes more sense. I think the Anglosphere, for example, would be far more likely to come and do better trade deals. We did a very bad, weak trade deal with Australia and Canada after Brexit. Let's revisit that. Let's make it closer. So let's get as close to the EU as they will allow us to, short of rejoining them. Sorry, I thought that's what you meant when you said choose between one or the other.
No, I was talking about on trade policy. I think you were basically saying the same thing as Deborah Meaden.
Yeah, well, obviously a very sensible suggestion. I mean, it makes no sense for us to be arguing about fish right now when so much is at stake with the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And if we want to offset the blow to trading with America, it makes more sense for other countries to trade more with each other. I think that Starmer is exactly the right person to lead this discussion.
Very interesting as ever, Fraser, and I'll look forward to reading that in detail as soon as I get off air. And it is live now on thetimes.com, so do take a look while you're listening into the show, of course. Well, there's a fantastic offer on subscriptions to The Times at the moment. So you'll be able to read journalism such as Fraser Nelson's and Caroline Wheeler's, for example. You can get your first 3 months for just £1. And to get that offer, you just need to head to The Times' website or app and look for the links to subscribe. The offer ends on Wednesday next week. No tariffs applied. And I think Fraser Nelson just came up with the word of the moment, tariffy. So I'm going to use that throughout the weekend.
Caroline, the top line we all seem to have taken from Liberation Day and how it affects us seems to have been that it was a sigh of relief from Sir Keir Starmer and the government. Is that just about right, do you think?
I'd be very surprised if that were true. I think that's the picture that they hope that we are taking from it, that we are really, relieved that we are not in the brackets that some of the other countries, including the European Union, are in. But look, I think even 10%, given the 25% tariff that's been slapped on our automotive industries, is still going to be a hammer blow to the economy. And I think that whilst we will try to dress it up as something to be pleased about, given all the diplomatic efforts that went into that relationship with Donald Trump, I still think there will be huge jitters going right through the political establishment as we speak. Because, look, we haven't even seen anybody talk about an impact statement yet. There's been talk about the impact that could have been with hundreds of thousands of job losses had there been a 20% tariff inflicted on us. So clearly the impact of even half of that is going to be fairly significant. But my sense at the moment is that we are not seeing much response because nobody knows very much, even the kind of intricacies and the details of how these tariffs are going to work, how exactly they're going to apply on sort of component parts that make up some of the things that we export that perhaps come from the EU. There's just so many questions about how it's all going to shake out that I think that at the moment the government and ministers are taking a bit of time to reflect, to really dig into what it all means, and to look into what the next couple of days and weeks will mean for the UK.
Has the notion of applying kind of reciprocal sanctions and tariffs on the Americans kind of been put on a back burner or just forgotten altogether?
I think that they think it would be counterproductive. The sense that I get from the people that I speak to in government is that they want us to have very much cool and calm heads, and that, you know, as we saw in response to the retaliatory action that was taken by the Chinese yesterday, where Donald Trump basically responded and said that they were not playing the game right. I mean, look, I think there's obviously two ways you can look at these tariffs. This could be the new status quo, or this could be what many of us expect to be a kind of opening gambit. This is all a bit of a game to Donald Trump. It's all part of the deal that he seeks to drive. And, you know, everything that we've seen coming out of the White House appears to suggest that, you know, he wants people to be banging on his door. He thinks, you know, he said only overnight that, you know, basically, you know, when we want a favour, nobody's interested. But now we've done this, we've got the world calling us and asking for things. And, you know, he very much wants to be seen to be in the driving seat of this. Now, how long it's sustainable, given the trillions of pounds that are being wiped off the stock market, is very much anyone's guess at this point. But it does seem to be a very high-stakes game of chicken.
Yeah, you do wonder if Trump will be at all responsive to the drop in his opinion poll ratings and to kind of consumer fury amongst his core voter base, the low paid in America, and if any change will come as a consequence of that. Meanwhile, we've got Sir Keir trying to get Donald Trump to visit the UK and meet the King earlier. This is the thing we can wave at Trump, isn't it? We wave King Charles at him and say, come over, come over.
Absolutely. And, that's the golden coaches strategy, which we've been hearing so much about. But I'm not absolutely sure that this is the kind of change that's been signified in the newspaper coverage today. I mean, my understanding was that there was always a working visit on the table that was purportedly due to happen this autumn, with a state visit to be offered next year. But look, we will be trying absolutely everything we have in our locker to try and alleviate the tariffs on the UK, and soft power is one of the things that we very much have, that we know is an attractive force for Trump. And look, we don't have a huge amount else to offer at this stage in terms of things that are attractive to him, but the royal family and his love of the United Kingdom, his real sort of Anglophobic sense of pride, having had a mother that came from the UK, is something that we can absolutely play on. And of course that will be something that the government will be factoring in.
Within the government, Caroline, it's a terribly difficult question for you, this, so I apologise in advance. But do you get the feeling that Sir Keir Starmer and those who surround him are simply kind of clinging on to whatever Donald Trump says and reacting in an instinctive manner and taking things as they come? Or do they have a clearer strategy for how to play Trump and what to do in the end?
I think it's a really interesting question, and I think it's something that a few of us have tried to answer. I mean, it does look like very often Donald Trump says something and we don't respond immediately, that we're much more reflective than some of the other governments that tend to kind of jump in with both feet. I mean, I was always told that we were following a kind of Abe strategy, which was a kind of sense that the Japanese leader had really struck up a very close relationship with Trump, and that they wanted to kind of move to this sort of middle ground in the way that they deal with it. So not to admonish him, not to turn him into the kind of pariah and use him as the kind of other to beat him with, in order to kind of make ourselves feel good about us taking a kind of moral high ground, but at the same time not being subservient to him either. So very much trying to kind of become that critical friend that Abe did for Japan to great effect. So that's definitely the strategy that we've been trying to sort of adopt. Now, whether that changes given the kind of global shocks that have been inflicted on the UK because of these tariff announcements will be really interesting to see. There's been lots of chatter about us having sort of retaliatory options on the table, but my sense, certainly talking to people within government, is that that's very much on the back burner. That is something that they will only deploy if it really, really comes to it. It's something that they don't want to do. They don't think that that's going to ingratiate us with Trump. But let's not forget, it's a really difficult tightrope that they're walking, because
incredibly difficult.
At the moment, we're also trying to do a deal with the EU, and that's something that's clearly going to upset the Trump administration if we walk too close to that line as well, given that, in many ways he's been talking about this being a kind of reward for us striking out with an independent trade policy post-Brexit.
Yeah, indeed. Fascinating stuff. Meanwhile, there are a few fears around that we could become a dumping ground for cheap Chinese electric cars. What's the Prime Minister going to do about this, do you think?
So again, I mean, he seems to have responded quite quickly to this. It sounds like they are certainly poised to ban the plans to basically ban hybrid vehicles from 2030. That now looks like it's going to be dropped, and other changes will be made to the sale of plug-in hybrids as well, which were all supposed to be only allowed until 2025. So look, the government does seem to be responding to this fairly rapidly. And, what's fascinating again about this is, we're having to change so many things so rapidly, things that, seem to have been entrenched, things that the government have had battles over because our plans over electric vehicles were much more ambitious than even the European Union's. And now we're having to play catch up on that in order to ensure that we don't lose any kind of competitive advantage. And I think we're going to see more of that. I mean, it's quite clear now that the Prime Minister thinks that the world has changed, which is something that we keep hearing about. But if we thought the world had changed when we had that spring statement only a week ago, it would appear the world has changed even more since then.
Oh, indeed. Now, a bit of fun. Ed Miliband has been accused of astounding hypocrisy after his department racked up a bill for domestic flights worth more than 40,000 quid during Labour's first 6 months in power. Will this affect him at all in any way, do you suppose?
He's never struck me as being the most popular member of the cabinet anyway, either within the cabinet itself or outside it. So I'm not sure that it will have a dramatic effect on his standing. And of course, you know, those around him would argue that if you look at his spending on travel compared to, for example, David Lammy, who's the Foreign Secretary, who has spent literally hundreds of thousands on travel since he came into office.
1.2 million, I think.
Is it even higher than I thought? Yeah. Then I think he will be saying that in comparison to that, he's been relatively modest. But look, you know, we know what his views are on the world. We know what his views are on saving the planet and the importance of, being green. So obviously this will be an embarrassment to him. But then, you know, again, people argue all the time that, it's domestic travel in terms of domestic flights that really does the damage rather than international travel. So, you know, I'm sure he'll find a way of wiggling out of that one.
Yeah, I'm sure. Now, you've been in Ukraine with Volodymyr Zelensky this week. What can you tell us about that visit, and what's his current views on peace talks and everything else?
Well, very moving event with him on Monday when we attended the third anniversary of the Bucha massacre. This is when only 30 kilometres, and I still find that extraordinary that there was a Russian occupation of a small city just outside of the capital, Kyiv, and really untold violence there with rapes and, just executions, just terrible stories that we heard while they were there. And I think I went to Kyiv with the leader of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, with a delegation of lots of other speakers from around Europe. And I think the message was really clear that in this time where we continually see this kind of flip-flopping by Donald Trump, who doesn't seem to be able to make his mind up about who is responsible for this war, this was another opportunity for Volodymyr Zelensky to show the world once again the brutality that the invasion has inflicted on his people. But it was really interesting talking to people around the president and really hearing from them that they very much still view the relationship with America as critical to their future, even after that extraordinary fallout in the Oval Office. There is no backtracking there. They still see that the American security guarantees are really crucial for their future. But look, they're sitting back like the rest of the world at the moment and watching and waiting. The ceasefire talks began. There seemed to be initial agreement that there would be some kind of ceasefire, and every single agreement that has been made or mooted has been violated almost immediately by Russia. So I think now they are very impatient for the Americans, in particular Donald Trump, to express what he's going to do next. There was a sense as we arrived in Kyiv on Sunday night that might be happening when Donald Trump talked about his fury towards Putin for having questioned not only Zelensky's legitimacy, but also the clear obfuscation that he's executing in terms of actually coming to the table. And I think, you know, that's something that's going to remain one of the biggest stories in the world. We're still expecting there to be a phone call at some point in the next couple of days between Putin and President Trump to work out what on earth comes next.
Yeah, well, Caroline Wheeler, thank you ever so much. And I apologise, Caroline, for having demoted you when I introduced you. I said you were the deputy political editor. You are, of course, a political editor. It's because it was in an old script which I've got here. And frankly, if it said that you were actually Evita Peron, I would have read it out. But apologies anyway.
Please don't worry.
Thank you.